Introduction: the obsidian reflection, the lie of terror. The human biomass dwells in a state of perpetual flight. The three-dimensional system, that network of control we call the egregore, has designed the architecture of your reality upon a single fundamental pillar, the management of panic. You have been indoctrinated to believe that fear is a biological alarm system. It is a firewall that warns you where your safety ends and annihilation begins. They taught you that to survive, you must retreat before what terrifies you, seek refuge in the known, and maintain your vibration in the lukewarmness of protected mediocrity. Subject this prudence to the scalpel of aseptic indifference. Fear is not a limit. It is a high-precision geometric compass. In the physics of creation, the egregore does not place armed guards in front of the treasures of the unified field. It places obsidian mirrors. The matrix hides your greatest reserves of gravitational mass and your portals toward absolute abundance behind images. It hides them behind the images that repel you most. What you call terror is nothing more than the allergic reaction of your slave ego to the proximity of its own omnipotence. The system uses your nightmares as a psychological minefield to ensure you never get close enough to the edge of the glass to discover the scam. They keep you fleeing from your own shadow so that you never reclaim the fuel that resides within it. Dare to stop the flight. The Black Mirror effect demands a posture that primate biology considers suicidal, absolute immobility before the abyss. Do you have the thermal coldness to stop running and hold the gaze? For the first time in your carbon existence, can you hold the gaze of the dark reflection? This treatise is not a self-help guide to overcome your fears. It is a manual of ballistic engineering to expropriate them. You must learn to look at the black surface of your own psyche and shatter the illusion of 3D danger. You must understand, with the arrogance of a surgeon, that the monster terrifying you in the reflection, that version of you that is cold, powerful, lethal, and immensely abundant, is not an external threat. It is your own sovereign version, your hyper-dense double, waiting for you to stop behaving like prey to start assimilation. Chapter 1. The Thermodynamics of Panic, the Unrefined Fuel. The Survival Scam, Diagnosis of the False Poison. The most colossal deception perpetrated by the 3D ecosystem against the human biomass lies in the biological interpretation of fear. Since the primate acquired consciousness, the parasitic system, the egregore, installed a defective translation software. They taught you to read terror as a stop sign. They told you that fear of bankruptcy, rejection, or death was a nature alarm designed to protect your fragile flesh vehicle, indicating you should retreat, hide, and seek refuge. Subject this pathetic doctrine to the aseptic light of the quantum operating room. Fear is not a psychological poison, nor is it a moral guardian. In the strict physics of superior creation, fear is high-density thermodynamic energy in its raw state. It is pure voltage. When the human animal faces a situation that deeply terrifies it, loss of status, absolute financial ruin, public humiliation, its primitive brain triggers a chemical storm. The heart pumps at speed. The nervous system electrifies and the entire body vibrates. The slave interprets this overload as agony. The lethal operator interprets it as the sudden and violent filling of his nuclear reactor's fuel tank. Fear is the raw material of manifestation. It is the most potent reservoir of gravitational mass on the ashboard. The system taught you to fear your own fear precisely because, if you ever learned to process that voltage without fleeing, you would hold enough electromagnetic power to fracture the matrix and materialize monopolies that would defy the logic of linear economy. You would become a localized anomaly in the field of matter. The flight hemorrhage, dissipation of the fuel. To understand how to use this fuel, you must first observe how the biomass wastes it daily. The mechanism of flight is the greatest tragedy of human thermodynamics. When the slave feels the impact of terror, his biology does not tolerate the atmospheric pressure of the voltage. The body expands due to the heat of panic. It seeks a relief valve to reduce internal pressure. How does the biomass dissipate this colossal energy? Through kinetic friction and emotional hemorrhage. They tremble, they cry, they run to find other slaves to tell their problems. They seek cheap distractions, consume matrix chemicals, or dive into holographic media. Every tear, every complaint, Every step you take away from the source of your terror is an open relief valve. You are taking the raw nuclear fuel that the universe just injected into your nervous system and throwing it in the trash. You are evaporating it into the air. When the slave finally calms down after fleeing, he has won no battle. He has simply emptied his reactor. He has returned to the state of inertia, weakness, and low density. He has given his thermal energy to the egregore, which feeds precisely on that dissipation. The peace of the coward is nothing more than the temperature of a corpse. It is a dead frequency. The sealing of the valve, paralysis before the mirror. The black mirror effect demands that you reverse this loss in a dictatorial way. You must learn the psychopathic discipline of valve sealing. The next time the ecosystem throws an existential threat in your face, when the market threatens to liquidate your assets or betrayal looms, your body will react with the usual discharge. You will feel terror invading the bloodstream. In that exact nanosecond, you execute magnetic paralysis. You do not flee. You do not seek comfort. You do not utter a single word to complain. You do not move a muscle of your biological anatomy. You anchor yourself to the ground with lead boots and hermetically seal all valves. You seal the escape valves of your carbon vehicle. You hold the gaze before the black mirror of your own nightmare. The mammalian body will beg you to do something, to solve the problem, to find a way out. You apply the silent guillotine to the survival instinct. You command the flesh. There is no flight, no dissipation. We are going to stay here, standing in the exact center of this panic, absorbing every millivolt of this radiation until the fear submits to my gravity. By refusing to vent the energy through spasmodic action, the fear remains trapped within your aseptic isolation. It begins to bounce against the walls of your immobility. It increases internal pressure to levels medical science would consider lethal for a normal primate. What happens inside an engine when you trap a volatile gas in a closed cylinder and compress it without letting it escape? Compression ignition occurs. You do not need an external spark. The mere force of pressure ignites. Compression ignition, transmuting terror into gravity. The pressure raises the temperature until the fuel explodes, generating an unstoppable driving force. This is the thermodynamics of panic applied to the architecture of the quantum operator. By holding the voltage of terror inside your body without reacting, you are compressing the fear. Panic is naturally an expansive gas. Under the dictatorship of your aseptic indifference, it has no choice but to condense. You will experience an atrocious alchemical phenomenon. The sensation of psychological fear will begin to mutate. It will stop feeling like a weakening human emotion and start feeling like a physical weight in your chest. The gas becomes liquid. The liquid becomes solid. Raw terror crystallizes into gravitational mass. This is the definitive expropriation. You have taken the threat designed to destroy you and digested it. By assimilating terror without blinking, you incorporated that threat's force into your electromagnetic field. You are no longer afraid of ruin falling upon you because you have become heavier, denser, and darker than ruin itself. You have transmuted the nightmare into pure iridium. Once you master the technology to refine the fuel of terror, your relationship with the ecosystem changes aberrantly. The slave builds walls. The menu of darkness, hunting for maximum friction. The slave spends his life avoiding his fears. The creator, understanding that fear is military-grade gasoline that feeds his quantum collapses, becomes a shadow hunter. You begin to scan the ashboard intentionally, looking for situations that most terrify your biology. You review your own menu of darkness. What causes you physical panic? Investing the totality of your capital in a single coordinate? Murdering a relationship that provides comfort but drains your voltage? Exposing your message with such lethal arrogance that it guarantees the hatred of the biomass? Where your stomach knots, the universe buried uranium. The lethal operator does not choose the path of comfort. He chooses the path of maximum internal emotional friction, precisely to detonate that energy deposit. You walk toward the most terrifying reflection because you know the terror is proportional to the hyperdensity you will gain once you assimilate it. Panic ceases to be an obstacle and becomes the topographical marker of the treasure. Be warned, the process of refining panic is not a peaceful visualization exercise. It is an industrial furnace. To inhabit the stasis of agony is to subject the carbon vehicle to maximum thermal torture without granting the relief of venting. The stasis of agony, the furnace of transmutation. When you voluntarily submerge yourself in your greatest fear, your brain will bombard you with hallucinations of disaster. It will project into your pineal gland all the ways you will fail, starve, or be destroyed by the ecosystem. The tactical order is to maintain immobility. Watch yourself burning with coldness. Watch yourself in the bonfire of your insecurities with the coldness of an entomologist pinning an insect. My biology is experiencing the thermal illusion of failure. My mammalian ego screams danger. All of this is static. All of this is unrefined fuel burning. I hold the vacuum. Holding the vacuum is the sovereign signature. Fear will try to convince you it is killing you, but thermodynamics dictates that an emotion cannot destroy a hyperdensity core unless the core yields its sovereignty. If you stay anchored and refuse to move to save yourself, a geological instant will come when the fear runs out of oxygen. It will suffocate. It will suffocate against the wall of your apathy. The fuel will have been fully refined. When the fire goes out and fear has been digested, what remains in your chest is not relief. Relief is the emotion of the slave who dodged a bullet. What remains in the creator is a terrifying pressure vacuum. Gravity extraction, the pressure vacuum. By consuming your own terror and transmuting it into mass, you have excavated a black hole in your magnetic field. You have created a zone of infinite density and zero friction. In unified field physics, nature abhors a vacuum. The material universe reacts immediately to this space-time deformation you just created. By removing the resistance of your own fear, the friction that repelled your ambitions, the abundance, territory, capital, and opportunities hiding behind that terror rush toward your coordinates to fill the void. It is assimilation by consumed terror. You do not get wealth by working harder. You get it by the gaze. You get it because you dared look the ghost of poverty in the eye, tore off its obsidian mask, and devoured its kinetic energy. The ashboard does not give resources as a reward for bravery. It gives them because you became heavier and darker than your nightmares. You became the dominant attractive force in the sector. Abundance is simply dead matter falling into the gravitational well you forged using your fears as a shovel. Look at yourself in the epicenter of stillness, standing before the black surface of the glass. You have managed to suffocate the pathetic lie of prudence. You stopped insulting your potential by fleeing, the operator at the mirror's edge. You stopped fleeing like a frightened prey every time the matrix fires your amygdala alarm. You understood that panic is not the enemy. It is the involuntary donation of high-octane fuel the system grants when you try to expand. You closed the escape valves. You mutilated the biological need to complain or tremble. You allowed the raw voltage of terror to bounce inside your carbon chassis, forcing it to compress under the crushing pressure of your aseptic indifference until it crystallized into pure and dictatorial mass. You no longer fear the darkness because you realized you are thermodynamically designed to digest it. You have made the menu of darkness your navigation chart. Panic has stopped being the wall that separated you from domination, to become the exact portal through which you must walk. Maintain the reactor seal. Hold the coldness in the blood. You extracted the first drop of power. Prepare for absolute ice. Chapter 2. The Baptism of the Void, Crossing the Glass Surface. The Heresy of Light, the 3D Purity Deception. The parasitic control system, in its urge to keep the biomass operating in high-friction frequencies, has injected a lethal philosophical virus, the worship of light. From primitive religions to contemporary commercial mysticism, the slave is indoctrinated to seek light, purity, love, and inner peace. They teach you to flee your dark zones. They teach you to repress your densest instincts and to heal your shadow through pathetic rituals of forgiveness. The lethal operator subjects this heresy to the relentless dissection of thermodynamics. What is light in strict physics? Light is expanding electromagnetic radiation. It consists of photons bouncing, losing energy, and dissipating. Seeking psychological light is an act of thermal hemorrhage. The individual obsessed with being good or moral becomes porous. Their atomic structure expands to radiate goodness toward an ecosystem that detests them, losing all gravitational mass in the process. Light has no weight. Light does not warp space-time. It simply travels. If you fear your own darkness, if you are terrified of the part of you capable of geometric violence and tactical cruelty, you are mutilating 90% of your fusion reactor. A creator. Fleeing his own shadow is an amputated organism. In the ashboard, what is transparent is torn apart. You must reject the light to achieve absolute power. The anatomy of the shadow, the hidden iridium deposit. Before crossing the glass surface, you must empirically catalogue what resides on the other side. You must conduct an aseptic inventory of your own shadow. The Matrix has conditioned you to feel shame for your biological defects, failures, perversions, and hidden arrogance. They told you these were errors to be corrected for the tribe. The slave hides these shames in the basement of his psyche, wasting vital energy keeping that door closed. Apply the optics of singularity to this useless effort. Those repressed traits are not defects, they are deposits of raw iridium. The rage you forbid yourself from feeling is latent hyperdensity. It is military-grade voltage. If you integrated this into your magnetic field, you would become ungovernable. The inferior ego rejects this darkness because it fears the pack's rejection. But the Creator does not need approval. You must view these defects not as sins to be purged, but as heavy weaponry to be expropriated and loaded into your quantum architecture. The thermal shock of immersion, shattering the glass. Reclaiming this weaponry is the baptism of the void. It is not a peaceful meditation. It is a brutal thermodynamic collision. You must cross the surface of the black mirror. Visualize the geometry of the siege. Stand before the image of everything you repudiate about yourself, your greatest fears and your most pathetic vulnerabilities. Biological instinct will scream with the force of 1,000 amygdala alarms. The body will demand you look away or flee toward the illusion of your good side. In that exact nanosecond, you apply torsional tension and dive headfirst into the absolute ice. You shatter the glass. You enter the frequency of your greatest internal shame. If you fear rejection for being a fraud, submerge yourself in the sensation of being exposed and destroyed. If you fear your own violence, dive into the pit of your unfiltered murderous rage. You will experience the thermal shock of immersion. Primate biology will feel suffocated. The pressure will generate a vertigo of total collapse. The suffocation of self-deception, breathing under the ice. While submerged in this dark void, the toughest resistance will be your own intellect trying to save you through self-deception. Under the pressure of the ice, the inner slave will throw rescue lines. I'm not that bad, or I had good intentions. You must execute the silent guillotine on every one of these justifications immediately. You must suffocate self-deception without the slightest compassion. In the baptism of the void, there is no oxygen for excuses. Look at the deformed monster of your insecurities and embrace it with tactical psychopathy. If you are a coward, assume it with coldness. I am a coward, I am weak, I am a pathetic and vulnerable creature. If you harbor atrocious selfishness, declare it. I am a tyrant. I do not care about the suffering of the biomass. I am a black hole of ambition. Push the assimilation to the limit of biological toxicity. Swallow the icy water of your darkness. By refusing to defend your honor, self-deception dies. You are left alone and naked. The transmutation of disgust into osmium, stillness alchemy. What happens to space-time when an organism dives into its greatest internal terror and refuses to flee or justify itself? The alchemy of gelida immobility occurs. The disgust and fear you felt for your shadows were the result of friction. It was your ego colliding with your darkness. But by accepting it, the friction disappears. Resistance drops to zero. Without resistance, darkness ceases to be toxic. That rage and shame, finding no wall to bounce against, freeze. The boiling gas of self-loathing undergoes a massive geometric contraction. It solidifies and transmutes into the heaviest metal of your armor, osmium. Your defect becomes an unshakable shield. You discover that your cruelty was not a sin. It was the ability to execute lethal decisions without a trembling pulse. Your selfishness was the architecture of mass concentration needed to avoid dispersing energy. Your fear, once frozen, is a millimeter radar sensor that anticipates collapse. You have turned slag into a reactor frame. The murder of guilt, eradicating karmic debt. For the baptism of the void to be definitive, you must annihilate the thermal parasite that accompanies human darkness, guilt. The egregore invented 3D morality and karma to ensure that if you ever discovered your dark power, you would punish yourself. The slave feels guilty for greed or for lacking empathy toward others. Guilt is a thermal radiation hemorrhage. It is a tax you pay for existing in a superior hierarchy. The lethal operator executes the tactical murder of guilt by assuming the dictatorship of his own nature. A black hole does not feel guilty for devouring a solar system. It simply exerts gravity. An asteroid does not apologize. While submerged in your darkness, declare absolute amnesty over your instincts. You owe no apologies to inferior biology. Your lethality is a thermodynamic imperative of an organism in a hyperdensity phase. By eradicating guilt, you cut the last supply line to the matrix. You become unbribable and free from any blackmail. Atomic fusion with the monster, predator symbiosis. When guilt is dead and the shadow has crystallized into osmium, the climax of the baptism is reached. You are no longer a human observing his dark side. Dualistic separation fractures. Atomic fusion occurs. You must assimilate the monster. That dictatorial and terrifying being is the true interface of your activated code. It is your combat vehicle for the ashboard. In a state of magnetic paralysis, you integrate that frequency into your spinal cord. Feel how the dark ice replaces your warm mammalian blood. Your nerve endings are coated with the iridium of apathy. The good version the ecosystem forced you to play is crushed and devoured. The apex predator has awakened. There is no light side and dark side. You are a single, indivisible mass of pure gravitational tension. You have executed atomic cannibalism on your own biology, devouring the frightened prey you used to be to feed the monarch who has just taken control of the entire nuclear reactor. The refraction of the black mirror, blind invulnerability, returning to the surface of 3D reality after surviving the void, makes you unrecognizable to the Matrix radar. The system attacks the biomass by exposing weaknesses and pressing insecurities. The egregore besieges you by showing your own fears. But what happens to an entity that has already digested its own nightmares? The refraction of the mirror occurs. When the Matrix tries to humiliate you by exposing a past failure, you feel no shame because you assimilated it in the void. The threat bounces off your indifference. When the ecosystem calls you a tyrant, you do not take offense. You nod with the gelida apathy of a geometric honor. You have become structurally invulnerable. No one can hurt you by discovering your shadow because you have merged with it in broad daylight. The ashboard discovers with soundless terror that there is no lever of moral or emotional coercion to move you. By inhabiting the night, you have become a celestial body. The operator of absolute ice, look at yourself on the shore of the internal abyss. Having emerged from the depths of your own obsidian reflection, you managed to suffocate the pathetic doctrine of light. You understood that emotional whiteness is the diet of weak slaves, while the Creator feeds on the density of his own repressed darkness. You gutted the basement of your mind without lighting a single candle of self-deception. The thermal shock of immersion did not crack your core. You breathed under the ice of self-disgust, eradicated guilt with the violence of a cosmic architect, and transmuted your biological defects into iridium armor. The baptism of the void has purged your reactor of any vestige of human vulnerability. You have assimilated the monster. You have integrated the predator. The reflection that once caused terror is now the electromagnetic signature you project upon the ecosystem to demand the total submission of all matter in your domain. Chapter 3. The Threat Reversal, the Assimilated Predator. The Executioner's Hologram, the Projection of Brute Force. The architecture of the three-dimensional matrix, the parasitic egregore, is sustained by an optical manipulation of cosmic proportions. The system knows that a hyperdense organism is uncontrollable, so it has designed a mechanism for you to expropriate your own power and hand it over to the environment. We call this the executioner's projection. Subject your external fears to the lethal light of the operating room. When the human slave observes the ashboard, he perceives monsters lurking in every coordinate. He is terrified of the ruthless financial market, trembles before corporate competitors who seem to have no scruples, and panics before bureaucracy or violent individuals. The human mammal cringes in his corner, convinced that the universe is full of predators designed to crush his fragile existence. The lethal operator executes the obsidian guillotine upon this optical illusion. Those monsters have no gravitational mass of their own. They are holograms powered by your own thermal battery. In the strict physics of consciousness, the human possesses a colossal reservoir of pure aggressiveness, zero friction, tactical cruelty, and indomitable will. But slave morality has taught him that these characteristics are bad, toxic, or immoral. By rejecting his capacity to be a predator, the human does not eliminate that energy. He simply expels it from his core and projects it onto the screen of the external world. The competitors that scare you and the economic crises that seem to devour everything are simply holographic mirrors reflecting back the silent, dictatorial, and violent power that you have forbidden yourself to use. You fear the wolf within. Terror outsourcing, thermodynamic sabotage. To assimilate the anatomy of this threat, you must understand the mechanics of terror outsourcing. The inferior ego, terrified by the immensity of its own destructive capacity, seeks an alibi. It prefers to be a good and moral prey rather than an obscure predator. In doing this, the human commits a pathetic act of sabotage. He commits the most pathetic act of thermodynamic sabotage in evolution. He hires external reality to act as the villain of his story. You grant your boss, your competition, or the global market the jurisdiction to crush you. You hand them the hyper-density of your unclaimed aggressiveness. They become terrifying because of your mass. You yourself have financed the executioners who keep you awake at night. As long as you continue to operate under the belief that danger comes from outside, you are signing a contract of perpetual submission. You are validating a hierarchy where you occupy the bottom. The creator fleeing his demons is fleeing his own amputated limbs. The prey diagnosis, the smell of 3D fear. In the fluid mechanics of quantum ecology, the universe does not operate with value judgments, it operates with the recognition of thermal signatures. How does the ecosystem distinguish a predator from a prey? It does not do so by physical size or self-help speeches. It does so by the smell of its internal friction. The prey emits the panic frequency. When a human feels threatened, his amygdala secretes cortisol, his heart accelerates, and his gaze becomes erratic. This biological reaction is an emission of electromagnetic heat. When the 3D matrix detects this heat, basic physics kicks in. Heat generates expansion, and expansion attracts entropy. If you run, the universe pursues you. It is a non-negotiable ballistic law. The inertia of flight excites the hunting instinct of the ashboard. The quantum operator must eradicate the thermal signature of the prey. You must apply magnetic paralysis. When the threat shows its fangs, forbid yourself the biological reflex to retreat. Freeze the blood in your veins. Hold your gaze without the pulse of your spinal cord increasing by a single hertz. In the millisecond you stop emitting the heat of fear and assume the absolute zero of indifference, the universe becomes disoriented. The threat stops dead, confused, because the thermodynamic radar lost the victim's trail. The predator-axis reversal, atomic cannibalism. The cessation of flight is only the preparation of the ground. The consummation of this phase requires an act of architectural violence that will fracture your psyche, the predator-axis reversal. It is not enough to stop fearing the threat, you have to devour it. You have to apply atomic cannibalism upon the wolf. Visualize your greatest competitor or the authority figure that paralyzes you. Observe them with the aseptic indifference of a forensic engineer. What attributes do they have that scare you? They are implacable. They have no mercy. They execute movements without hesitation. They do not apologize for crushing weakness. The slave says, "I don't want to be like them. I am ethical." The dictatorial monarch applies the scalpel to that false morality and dictates, "Those attributes belong to me. They are using my heavy weaponry. It is time to expropriate it." Assimilate the threat. Excise the external image and keep only the frequency of its ferocity. Inject that gelida cruelty and absolute lack of mercy directly into your own cellular reactor. You become the entity that does not doubt. You become the zero-friction organism that crushes obstacles without remorse. By assimilating the predator, the external monster vanishes because you have stolen the conceptual skeleton of it. Gravitational judo, stealing the aggressor's inertia. Once you have assimilated the anatomy of the threat, your interaction with the ecosystem's attacks mutates into a discipline of asymmetric destruction. We call this gravitational judo. In 3D combat physics, when a force heads toward you, the biomass instinct is to raise a shield and try to block the blow. Blocking requires applying a kinetic force opposite to the attack. This generates brutal friction, a thermal shock that exhausts your energy and eventually crushes your bones. The lethal operator blocks nothing. The lethal operator absorbs the mass. Imagine a rival corporation launches a massive offensive against your coordinates. They come with inertia, speed, and thermal aggressiveness. You apply the vacuum. You anchor yourself in your own hyperdensity and open your magnetic field. You offer no resistance. You allow the force of the attack to enter your jurisdiction. In the exact instant the threat crosses your event horizon, you use its momentum. You do not react with anger. You receive the injection of hostile energy, pass it through the gelida turbine of your aseptic indifference, strip it of its intent, and add that kinetic mass to your own tonnage. If they defame you, use the noise to illuminate your own monopolies. The attack becomes the fuel to catapult your empire. The murder of the clemency instinct, aseptic weaponry. The threat reversal demands the death of a specific moral parasite, the clemency instinct. When you apply the gravity of the assimilated predator, you will notice the external ecosystem collapses under your weight. Threats disintegrate. Enemies who attacked you fracture and fall into ruin as they crash against your osmium wall. At this point, the remnant of your slave programming will try to intervene. The internal biomass will whisper, "You have won. Have mercy. Show you are superior by forgiving them." Subject that voice to the reactor's fire. Clemency, in the quantum mechanics of domination, is a thermal leak. It is the arrogance of the weak. The lethal operator knows no clemency because clemency implies moral judgment. A black hole does not forgive the planets that fall into its well. It simply disintegrates them because that is its topographical function. When you expropriate the predator's power, you assume its mathematical lethality. You apply aseptic weaponry. If an obstacle crosses your trajectory, you do not move it gently. You run it over with the soundless steamroller of your inertia. You eradicate them from the ashboard without hatred or pity. You dismantle them with the sovereign boredom of an office worker shredding useless paper. Your jurisdiction demands unconditional evaporation. Habitat absorption, the expansion of the shadow. By consuming external threats and assimilating their ferocity, your gravitational mass undergoes violent geometric dilation. You are no longer just the core, you are becoming the atmosphere of the ecosystem. We categorize this as habitat absorption. The scared human lives in a small perimeter, terrified of the dark zones. The monarch who has reversed the predator axis no longer walks through the forest. He becomes the forest. Your electromagnetic shadow expands, devouring territories, financial sectors, and social hierarchies. The danger zones now belong to you. The entire ecosystem becomes your aseptic playground for your command. The physical matrix and the inferior minds near you will feel this change in atmospheric pressure. They will no longer see you as just another player. Your thermal signature has transmuted. The biomass will detect that the individual before them possesses no biological breaks of fear or guilt. They feel the apex predator. As a direct consequence of this habitat absorption, competition disappears. You do not need wars of attrition. Their biological alert system will order them to retreat before the confrontation begins. They will abandon contracts and lower their gaze, moved by the soundless terror of knowing that to face you is a death sentence. The mirror reflects the monster, terminal symbiosis. The consummation of Chapter 3 occurs when you stand again before the obsidian black mirror, but this time the optics have undergone an absolute distortion. In the introduction, you looked at the mirror and saw the monster of your fears trying to devour you. You saw bankruptcy and humiliation. You fled from that reflection. Now, after having executed the baptism of the void, having suffocated the cry of your own flesh, and having cannibalized the ferocity of the holographic wolf, you stand before the same dark crystal surface. You lift your gaze, and the terror disappears. It does not disappear because the monster has gone. It is much deeper. It disappears because you realize, with the gelida lucidity of the singularity, that the monster is staring back at you from your own eyeballs. You are the threat. You are the financial collapse of your competitors. You are the unfathomable abyss that terrifies the mediocre. You are the tactical cruelty that does not forgive. You are the unstoppable force of nature that the biomass prays never to encounter. You have achieved terminal symbiosis. You have fused the scared slave with the implacable executioner, and from that mutual annihilation, the lethal operator has been born. The universe cannot intimidate you when you are the destructive force, the sovereign at the top of the chain. Look at yourself in the geological epicenter of your own domination, operating from the absolute stillness of the dietary vertex. You managed to suffocate the optical illusion of weakness. You understood the matrix did not send threats to destroy you. It sent mirrors of your own expropriated power, waiting for you to reclaim it. You mutilated terror outsourcing. You cancelled the contract with your external executioners and ripped the gravitational mass from their hands. You executed gravitational judo, allowing hostile energy to crash against your internal vacuum, adding its inertial force to the expansion of your monopolies. You are the law. You murdered the clemency instinct, assuming the mathematical lethality of aseptic weaponry without a single beat of human remorse. The prey has died. The slave who trembled before the market or the tribe has been devoured and digested in the furnaces of your own quantum reactor. Your core is now absolute and dense. In its place stands the hyper-dense monarch, an organism that walks the ashboard radiating the absolute cold of the supreme predator. The ecosystem accounts to you not because it loves or respects you, but because its atomic structure bends in panic before the pressure of your shadow. Stay heavy, stay helido. The reign is yours. Chapter 4. The Financial Black Hole, the Portal of Poverty. The scarcity scam, the illusion of the fluid. The three-dimensional control system, the egregore that manages the ashboard, has designed its most unbreakable prison not with steel bars, but with a holographic mirage that the biomass calls money. Subject the concept of human economy to the aseptic indifference of quantum mechanics. The human mammal lives convinced. The mammal is convinced that money is a material, finite, and scarce resource. They believe it is a real entity they must pursue, catch, and accumulate to ensure cellular survival. They have built a global religion based on the worship of printed paper and electronic digits on liquid crystal screens. It is a mass hallucination. The lethal operator executes the obsidian guillotine on this slave delusion. Money has no mass. It has no atomic structure of its own. It has no intrinsic value. In the strict physics of superior creation, capital is simply a thermodynamic fluid. It is a conductor of inertia. It is the blood of the 3D ecosystem. It is designed to always flow toward where atmospheric pressure is lowest and gravitational mass is densest. The system indoctrinates you to fear the lack of this fluid. They inject the terror of poverty into you from the first nanosecond of your biological education. They tell you that without money, you will starve. They say you will be a social exile and suffer the elements. This terror is not a side effect of capitalism. It is the fundamental genetic programming to keep the species operating as friction engines, burning their vital energy in mediocre jobs, begging for raises and paying homage to the matrix masters just to avoid the abyss. The persecution hemorrhage, the beggar's sweat. To understand how the portal of poverty works, you must first diagnose the tactical error that keeps the biomass in a state of perpetual financial bleeding. We categorize this error as the persecution hemorrhage. Observe the ambitious slave. He wants to be rich. He reads books on wealth, repeats affirmations, and visualizes. He visualizes mountains of gold and goes out to work hard to get it. He sweats, stresses, competes, and pursues money with animal desperation. What occurs at a thermodynamic level? Desire is a declaration of lack. When you desire money, you are emitting an electromagnetic frequency that screams to the universe, I have no mass. I have no gravitational mass. I am weak. Money is superior to me. Therefore, I must run after it. Running generates friction. Friction generates heat. Heat causes the expansion of your magnetic field, making you porous, light, and unstable. In fluid dynamics, if you try to catch water with open, frantically moving hands, it slips. The water slips through your fingers. Pursuit itself pushes capital in the opposite direction. The more you need 3D money, the more violently the ecosystem pushes it away from your coordinates. The culture of effort and hard work is the perfect trap to ensure the human never possesses capital, keeping it at a distance. It is like the carrot before the beast of burden. The Black Mirror effect requires that you stop this humiliating pursuit immediately. You have to turn around and face exactly what you have been fleeing your entire existence. The abyss of absolute poverty. You have to stand before the obsidian surface and face the vertigo of ruin. The vertigo of ruin, looking at the bottom of nothingness, the mammalian ego will try to abort the mission. The brain will flood you with images of destitution, hunger, public humiliation, unpayable debts, and loved ones suffering. The amygdala will fire lethal levels of cortisol. You will feel an atrocious physical panic in your stomach. It is the fear of social disappearance. It is the terror of being worth nothing in the ecosystem of slaves. At this critical point, the average human looks away. He says, I don't want to think about that, and returns to the hamster wheel to keep chasing crumbs. The quantum operator, on the contrary, executes gelider immobility. You forbid yourself from looking away. You force yourself to descend to the bottom of financial absolute zero. See yourself stripped of every cent, every property, every line of credit, and every false illusion of material security. It is not a masochistic exercise. It is a thermodynamic audit. You have to look the ghost of poverty in the eye until you understand it. You must understand the ghost has no physical claws. The terror of scarcity is only an illusory atmospheric pressure. If you run out of money, your biological vehicle does not spontaneously disintegrate. Your quantum core does not lose its voltage. You are still the singularity, just temporarily devoid of holographic props. The expropriation of insecurity, baptism in absolute zero. Once you hold your gaze before total ruin, without a single tendon of your biological anatomy tensing, you experience the baptism in absolute zero. You have to voluntarily assimilate the worst possible scenario. You have to accept total bankruptcy as a thermodynamically acceptable fate. This does not mean you desire poverty. It means you apply aseptic indifference to the possibility of poverty. You declare in the soundless silence of your reactor, if the ecosystem strips me of all my 3D assets today, if tomorrow I wake up in physical destitution, my internal density will not suffer the slightest fluctuation. I accept the abyss. I fear nothing. I fear nothing because I come from nothing and I am the architect of nothing. In the exact millisecond you manage to feel total and sincere apathy toward the idea of losing all your money, a transmutation phenomenon occurs that fractures the laws of classical economics. You have executed the expropriation of insecurity. The parasitic system used the threat of poverty as the rope tied to your neck. They pulled the rope to make you work, to make you obey, to make you doubt your own greatness. But by diving into the black mirror and accepting ruin with psychopathic boredom, you have cut the rope with an iridium blade. You are sovereign. You have stolen from the matrix its main weapon of coercion. The egregore is left without ammunition. When the universe detects that the idea of having nothing to eat fails to alter your heart rate, the universe loses control over your magnetic field. You become, for the first time in your biological existence, structurally free. The architecture of the black hole, the pressure vacuum. By having annihilated the fear of scarcity, you experience a massive gravitational contraction inside your consciousness. Since you are no longer expanded in the anxiety of pursuing or protecting money, your field contracts, becomes dark, silent, and heavily dense. You have forged the architecture of the black hole. In the mechanics of quantum fluids, a black hole does not go out to hunt stars. A black hole is simply a point in space where density is so overwhelmingly high that it creates an infinite pressure vacuum around it. Nature abhors a vacuum. Therefore, all orbiting matter is forced to rush toward it to try to fill that lack. When you become the financial black hole, you apply this same physics to liquid capital. By not needing money, by not fearing its absence, by having assimilated poverty to the point of total indifference, you create a pressure vacuum in the market around you. 3D money is a low-density fluid that seeks major centers of mass. It detects your aseptic immobility. It detects that you are not sweating for it. It detects that you are thermodynamically superior to it. And as a non-negotiable ballistic consequence, the capital loses its own inertia and begins to fall into your gravitational well. It has no choice but to gravitate toward your coordinates. The evaporation of effort, the heresy of work. The emergence of the financial black hole demands the murder of the human herd's most sacred ethic, the moral value of hard work. The biomass believes that earning millions without suffering is a sin, a karmic injustice, or a scam. They taught you that you must exchange your time, your vital energy, for paper currency. They taught you that the amount of blood you leave in the process justifies your wealth. The lethal operator repudiates the heresy of effort. Money does not obey merit. Money does not obey moral goodness. Money obeys only and exclusively gravity. If you have an immense mass, you will attract massive capital. You will attract it even if you do not rise from your obsidian throne. If you are a light and frightened slave, you will lose your capital, even if you work 20 hours a day in the ecosystem mines. Once the portal of poverty has been crossed and fear annihilated, you will observe how financial opportunities manifest. Colossal contracts and liquidity injections begin to manifest in your coordinates with an ease that is insulting to the common mammal. Your old competitors will see you execute monopolies without seeming to spend a single erg of energy and will call you lucky or accuse you of fraud. Let them howl. Their ignorance is their wall. You understand that you are not working for money. You are simply allowing the financial fluid to follow its natural thermodynamic course toward the heaviest center of gravity in the sector. Attraction is not a job, it is a state of being. To maintain the black hole, you must execute a radical reprogramming of your perception. The murder of perceived value, blasphemy against gold. You must avoid the sudden influx of capital evaporating your density. You must perform the murder of perceived value. When the slave receives an astronomical sum of money, his amygdala ignites, but this time with the vibration of euphoria. They feel they have touched God. They look at their bank accounts and buy luxury items. They display their trophies to the biomass and celebrate because money has granted them salvation. This thermal euphoria is the beginning of their imminent ruin. By deifying capital, they return hierarchical superiority to dead matter. Money becomes their master again, and they become light slaves, terrified of losing it. The monarch, who has already walked through the abyss of poverty in his own mind, receives millions of dollars with the same gelida apathy as sweeping dry leaves in the yard. You forbid yourself from assigning emotional, mystical, or hierarchical value to 3D figures. You must look at massive capital with absolute contempt. It is paper. It is numbers on a screen. It is low-vibration stardust. By murdering the perceived value of gold, you keep your gravitational mass intact. The universe throws millions at you, and you do not even blink. This blasphemy against the god of money is the definitive thermodynamic humiliation of the matrix. The system tries to buy you, trying to seduce you with material wealth, but since you refuse to be moved, the system cannot extract your thermal friction. You end up absorbing its resources incessantly, staying at absolute emotional zero. The biomass will argue that life without enjoying wealth has no meaning. The magnetism of brutal indifference, aseptic consumption. That is the optics of the parasite that needs external stimuli to feel alive. The quantum operator does not seek 3D enjoyment. He operates from the monarch's stasis. You use the unlimited resources the black hole attracts to collapse new monopolies and to pave your territorial empire, but you do so through aseptic consumption. You acquire properties that defy architecture, assimilate corporations, and move capital with the soundless precision of a war machine. You do not buy to be happy or to impress the herd orbiting in low frequencies. You execute material manifestation simply because that is the geological function of a singularity. It is forcing matter to adopt the shape of the core's will. Brutal indifference toward capital becomes the ultimate magnet. The global financial ecosystem operates under algorithms of chaos and volatility, always seeking structural stability. When the market detects an organism that cannot be destabilized, capital migrates. Capitals migrate toward your orbit, seeking the gelida peace of your invulnerability. You become the Federal Reserve of quantum physics, attracting wealth not because you want it, but because you are the only thermodynamically stable refuge in an ecosystem of collective hysteria. You are the immovable point in the storm. The collapse of the economic equation, boundless sovereignty. As you sustain the black hole, 3D economy becomes like Play-Doh in your iridium hands. You have reversed the polarity of terror. The black mirror, which first showed you the nightmare of wandering without resources and rejected by the tribe, now reflects the terrifying truth of your own omnipotence. You are the void. You discovered that poverty was not a material state, but a state of mental friction. It was the prison of pursuit. By crossing your arms, giving up flight, and voluntarily falling into the pit of imaginary ruin, you suffocated the illusion of scarcity. You realized that the bottom of the abyss never existed. It was simply a vacuum tunnel connecting you directly to the infinite energy network of the cosmos. By losing the fear of having nothing, you gained the physical right to possess everything. The laws of traditional economics, supply, demand, inflation, risk, lose all jurisdiction over your coordinates. They are for slaves. Those laws were written to regulate the thermal conduct of slaves, not to limit the geometric expansion of creators. For you, risk has disappeared. If the universe collapses today, tomorrow, your gelida immobility will have sucked back double the capital lost before noon. Your wealth depends only on the weight of your indifference. The throne at the center of the abyss. Look at yourself in the absolute epicenter of the black hole you just forged, floating in the financial vacuum, sustained by the immovable inertia of your own cellular density. You managed to suffocate the master scam of the 3D matrix. You stopped insulting your core by chasing pieces of paper like a frightened beggar. You understood that the slave's sweat is the acid that dissolves his own gravity. You dared to look the monster of destitution in the eyes. Instead of running, you executed magnetic paralysis and allowed the terror of bankruptcy to bounce in your carbon chassis until it crystallized and transmuted into heavy metal armor. You expropriated the terror. You cut the rope of economic threat. You eradicated the perceived value of gold and humiliated the heresy of kinetic effort. By accepting absolute zero in your mind, you forced the universe's matter to fill your space with an abundance that borders on the grotesque. It is yours by law. There is no more pursuit. There is no more financial friction. The portal of poverty has been crossed, and what waited on the other side was not starvation, but total thermodynamic sovereignty. Maintain the stasis. Hold the coldness. The capital of the world is now falling into the abyss of your unstoppable command. Chapter 5. Suffocation of Imposter Syndrome, the Usurper's Arrogance. The reptiles counterattack the legitimacy alarm. When the lethal operator has crossed the portal of poverty and stabilized the financial black hole, the matter of the ashboard begins to bend. Capital, territory, and influence rush toward your coordinates, obeying the strict physics of your new hyperdensity. You are at the top. You have warped reality. But it is exactly at the geological coronation of the empire where the 3D control system deploys its most poisonous, silent, and lethal psychological weapon, imposter syndrome. Subject this pathology to the quantum operating room. Biomass psychiatry classifies it as a simple self-esteem problem. The creator diagnoses it deeper. It is a thermodynamic safety mechanism of primitive biology. As your empire expands without friction, your mammalian brain, the ancient reptile that lived in scarcity, detects that you have abandoned the habitat of the tribe. It realizes you possess power and abundance that defy human statistics. The reptile enters a state of panic. It injects a neurochemical poison designed to convince you that everything is a mistake. It whispers in the darkness. You don't deserve this. You're a fraud. Someone will realize you're not a god, but the same scared slave, and they'll take it all. This voice is not philosophical. It is an act of thermal sabotage. Survival instinct is trying to force a voltage collapse to return you to the safety of the mud, because mud is the only environment the mammal knows how to process. If you yield a single millimeter to this doubt, your gravity fractures. You must maintain the pressure of your sovereign identity without any emotional leaks. The fallacy of merit, the fraud of moral effort. To suffocate the imposter, you must first execute the obsidian guillotine upon the most sacred lie of human civilization, the concept of merit. The egregore indoctrinated you from the incubator to believe in the morality of effort. They told you that power and wealth had to be earned through sweat, nobility, and validation. They taught you that only the worthy can sit on the throne, and that dignity is measured by the amount of suffering you have endured for the tribe. This is the doctrine of the perfect slave. Apply aseptic indifference to the architecture of the physical universe. The cosmos does not care about your morality. Gravity does not obey the good and punish the bad. Gravity does not review your resume or analyze your childhood traumas. A massive black hole devours a solar system not because it deserves it, but because of the raw and brutal undeniability of its mathematical mass. It is a matter of sheer volumetric pressure. Imposter syndrome feeds on your underlying belief in merit. You feel like a fraud because you know you achieved your empire by applying zero-friction physics instead of killing yourself working as the Matrix ordered. You feel guilty for the ease with which the universe obeys you. The quantum operator repudiates this guilt. Break the contract with meritocracy. Declare in the sepulchral silence of your core that power is not deserved, power is collapsed. You don't have your empire because you are good, but because you modified the atmospheric pressure of your own consciousness. Physics does not apologize for functioning. You are the result. The usurper's baptism, thermodynamic theft. Once you destroy the illusion of merit, the inferior ego will attack you from another latitude. It will tell you, then if I haven't earned it under human laws, it means I've stolen it. The Creator does not flee from this accusation. He assimilates it, digests it, and wears it as a crown. You execute the usurper's baptism. Are you an imposter? Of course you are. Under the optics of the biological taxonomy you just deserted. For the human bleeding out in the Matrix factory, you, who alter reality with the simple tyranny of presence, are an absolute fraud. You are an error in their matrix. You are a hacker who has bypassed the firewalls. Embrace the identity of the usurper. You are not the legitimate heir of the 3D system. You are the hyperdensity virus that entered the code and expropriated control of the simulation. Look at the obsidian mirror and assume the psychopathy of usurpation. You have stolen the fire. You have expropriated the radiation. You have taken the territory of insects and turned it into your landing strip. The monarch does not ask the ashboard for permission to rule it. Legality and legitimacy are concepts invented by prey to try to stop predators. By accepting with gelida coldness that you are the thermodynamic usurper, the syndrome loses its sting. It can no longer threaten to discover you because you have already openly declared to yourself the criminal nature against human laws of your divinity. Theoretical understanding is not enough to silence the spasms of biology. When internal dialogue generates the friction of doubt, apply the technique of acoustic suffocation. Acoustic suffocation, silencing the tenant. The tactical error of the biomass when it feels imposter syndrome is trying to argue with itself. The slave seeks proof of his own value. He reviews his achievements and repeats positive affirmations to convince his brain he deserves to be there. In quantum mechanics, arguing with a frequency is giving it mass. If you defend yourself against the voice of your own doubt, you are telling the universe that the doubt has enough gravitational weight to deserve a response. You are validating it. You are feeding it with the heat of your argumentative friction. The lethal operator executes the silence of the monolith. When the reptile voice whispers, "You're a fraud about to lose your empire," apply magnetic paralysis inside your skull. Do not respond. Do not seek proof of your greatness. Do not try to calm the anxiety. Simply observe the thought with the densest and heaviest quantum boredom in the universe. It is irrelevant. Watch it as you would observe the buzz of a mosquito hitting armored glass. The voice will speak and attempt to ignite the amygdala, and it will crash against the wall of your aseptic indifference. By refusing the kinetic energy of a response, the doubt runs out of oxygen. It suffocates due to lack of resonance. The tenant's voice dies in the vacuum of your own apathy. The hyperdensity of your structure remains intact, without having spilled a single volt in justifications. To fill the vacuum left by the suffocation of doubt, the operator must forge a new psychological interface: geometric arrogance. Geometric arrogance, the iridium ego. The matrix abhors arrogance because arrogance, when backed by mass, is impermeable to manipulation. They taught you to be humble, arguing that humility is a spiritual virtue. Subject humility to the reactor fire. Humility is the aesthetic of the slave. It is the survival tactic of the prey that shrinks. An organism vibrating at 144,000 Hertz cannot be humble without betraying the laws of physics, but do not confuse this with primate arrogance. The human ego is loud, fragile, and needs to shout its achievements to validate itself. It is offended, if not recognized. That is a thermal, hollow, and expansive arrogance. The Creator installs geometric arrogance. It is an iridium ego, silent, heavy, immovable, and blind to others' opinions. It is the arrogance of a planet's core. You don't need to tell the biomass you are the sovereign. You simply occupy space with such density that the ecosystem curves around your presence. Geometric arrogance operates under one premise: I am not a fraud because it is physically impossible for matter to lie. If your assets are colossal and your voltage warps reality, that is empirical physics. You are the force causing that collapse. Assume your monstrosity. Assume your lethality. You are an avalanche. Matrix scrutiny, the ecosystem audit. When you suffocate internal doubt, the 3D control system will try to inject friction from the outside. The egregore, detecting your geometric arrogance, will send probes to test your armor. This manifests as matrix scrutiny. Suddenly, agents of friction, partners or media, will question your legitimacy. They will ask for explanations and demand you justify your methods. They will suggest your success is unearned, a product of luck, or a scam. They will try to activate your imposter syndrome from the outside, pressing the buttons of social shame. The biomass, faced with this attack, usually yields and apologizes. They apologize for their success or waste themselves in debates trying to convince insects they are worthy. By doing this, they match their frequency to the attacker and lose the crown. The lethal operator executes the veto of explanation. If the ecosystem questions your right to the throne, your answer is the void. Do not defend your empire. Do not present excuses. Do not bother educating the blind on the fluid mechanics of your hyperdensity. Stare into their eyes, activate the torsional tension of your silence, and let the weight of your gaze crush their lungs. By refusing to defend legitimacy, you establish it. The murder of emotional debt, veto on 3D gratitude. You demonstrate that their opinion has the same gravitational weight as dust. The ecosystem, crashing against your osmium wall and receiving no friction, withdraws humbled. There is one last biological trap that oxygenates imposter syndrome: emotional debt. Slave spirituality demands constant gratitude. They say you must thank the universe for all it has given you. Subject this to the dissection of zero-point optics. When you experience gratitude under the human definition, you are implicitly recognizing that something external did you a favor. You assume the universe is a benefactor that gave you a gift. If you feel power was lent by a superior entity, imposter syndrome will lurk, whispering that the universe can change its mind. The Homo quantum executes the murder of emotional debt. You feel no gratitude toward the ecosystem for your empire, just as an engine feels no gratitude toward gasoline. It is a physical process. You applied the sub-base frequency, aligned your genome at 144,000 Hertz, and forged the black hole. The abundance surrounding you is not a gift. It is the war booty of your engineering. Replace human gratitude with aseptic recognition. There is no debt. Everything is yours by conquest. Mutation of the reflex, the human skin suit. To seal the process, you must alter how you relate to your own past. The slave looks at his history, the times he was poor or scared, and feels that is his true identity, while the powerful creator of today is just a temporary disguise. They feel they are faking being gods. The operator inverts this. You are not a scared human faking being a god. You are the cosmic singularity, the lethal force of the unified field, which for a millisecond had to wear the suffocating disguise of a scared human to infiltrate the ashboard. That weak human of your past. That was the imposter. That was the suit. That fearful identity was the flesh suit the Matrix forced you to wear. Now that you have broken the lock and ignited the stellar ladder, you have taken off the disguise. You haven't become someone new. You have returned to your original hyperdensity. When you assimilate this memory inversion, the fraud vanishes. You are not usurping another's throne. You are reclaiming the command seat of your own vehicle. Imposter syndrome crashes against the living rock of this biological certainty. There is nothing to fear because there is no trace left of the slave who could be discovered. Only the monarch remains in the dark. The usurper's throne. Look at yourself in the exact center of the sanctuary of your own mind, having eradicated the most persistent parasite of inferior biology. You have managed to suffocate the reptile's alarm. You understood that doubt was not an objective evaluation, but a thermal leak designed to return you to mediocrity. You mutilated the fallacy of moral merit, assuming with the coldness of a monolith that the universe only accounts to the raw weight of gravity. You executed the usurper's baptism. You assumed the identity of the fire thief, refusing to ask for forgiveness for hacking the laws of scarcity. You are the virus. You silenced internal dialogue through acoustic suffocation and replaced the fragile ego with iridium geometric arrogance. You murdered the emotional debt of 3D gratitude. Understanding your empire is the ballistic consequence of your own applied physics. Finally, you realized the real farce was believing you were weak. The throne is yours, not by inheritance, nor by compassion of the system, but because you have sat on it with such immovable violence that the wood has fused with the osmium of your bones. The impostor is dead. The usurper has been crowned. Maintain the gelida stasis. The simulation is now under your command. Chapter 6. The fear of rejection, the purging of the herd. The genetics of exile, the instinct of the gregarious insect. The three-dimensional ecosystem does not control the biomass solely through financial scarcity or the fear of physical annihilation. Its third tool of mass containment is social terror. To dismantle this mechanism, you must apply the scalpel to the evolutionary history of the carbon container you inhabit. In the night of biological times, the human mammal was a fragile, slow creature devoid of natural armor. Its only survival technology was the herd. If an individual was repudiated by the tribe and expelled from the cave, they did not face a self-esteem problem. They faced thermal death and predation within hours. The cellular biology of the slave encoded this mathematical equation. Belonging equals survival. Exile equals death. The egregore, the parasitic system that manages the ashboard, exploits this genetic memory with sadistic precision. They have injected the terror of rejection into your spinal cord. It terrifies you to be the weird one. You are paralyzed by the idea of being publicly criticized, and your amygdala enters combustion if it detects that the biomass does not approve of your actions. This fear is not a flaw in your psychology. It is the command chain of the gregarious insect ensuring that the ant never leaves the line. While you fear rejection, you are chained. The tax of belonging, hemorrhage by camouflage. To assimilate the urgency of eradicating this terror, you must audit the thermodynamic cost of adaptation. What does the ecosystem demand from a creator to allow belonging to the tribe? It demands the tax of belonging. Human biomass vibrates in a high-friction frequency based on complaining, victimhood, cheap morality, and scarcity. If you possess a core operating at 144,000 Hz, radiating aseptic indifference and the hyperdensity of a monarch, the pack will detect your radiation as a lethal threat. To avoid offending them or provoking their envy, the mammalian intellect forces you to activate camouflage. You dilute your message, you soften your arrogance. The lethal operator diagnoses this camouflage as a crime of high gravity against your own atomic structure. Lowering your frequency so the herd does not feel intimidated requires a massive investment of energy. It is a constant thermal hemorrhage. You are using the voltage of your own nuclear reactor to project a hologram. You project the image of an ordinary slave just so real slaves do not attack you. The price of social acceptance is the castration of your hyperdensity. While you pay the tax of belonging, your empire will never be more than a simulation, because it is impossible to dominate an ecosystem while you beg for its approval. The tyranny of offense, the moral siege of the biomass. When you begin to recover your mass and abandon camouflage, the matrix deploys its immune defense, the tyranny of offense. The 3D herd has discovered that the most efficient way to neutralize an apex predator without physical combat is to accuse them of immorality. They will call you arrogant, heartless, toxic, or selfish. They will use social guilt as an electromagnetic ram to try to fracture your osmium armor. They will try to convince you that your hyperdensity is a disease and that you are hurting others with your coldness. The reaction of the frightened mammal is to retreat, apologize, and try to explain themselves to the tribe. The quantum operator repudiates the explanation. You understand that the biomass's offense is not an ethical evaluation, it is a physical reaction. If you ignite an industrial furnace next to a block of ice, the ice melts. The ice does not melt because the furnace is bad. It melts because it lacks structural integrity. In the same way, the biomass is offended by your presence not because you are a villain, but because the misery of their lives is calcined upon contact with the incisive radiation of your sovereignty. Their offense is simply the sound that weakness makes when being evaporated by hyperdensity. You are the heat they cannot endure. The baptism of repudiation, crossing the social mirror. To destroy the terror of rejection, you must use the Black Mirror effect in its most violent form. You have to walk directly toward exile. You have to execute the baptism of repudiation. You stand before the obsidian crystal and contemplate the worst possible social scenario. You visualize the biomass turning its back on you. You observe how the low-density connections you called friends abandon you. You see the 3D society pointing at you, condemning you, and expelling you from its friction circles. You feel absolute isolation. The reptile in your brain will enter biological panic. It will scream that you are going to die in the open. In that nanosecond of pure terror, you apply torsional tension and close the valves. You do not blink. You do not run for approval. You force your carbon vehicle to remain immobile within the abyss of global disapproval. You swallow the bile of social rejection and assimilate it with aseptic indifference in your core. You declare, "Let them repudiate me, let them be offended. I accept the repudiation of the scum as the thermodynamic medal of my own mutation. Exile is not my punishment, it is my natural ecosystem." By holding gelida immobility, the terror runs out of oxygen. The fear transmutes into gravitational mass and absolute power. Rejection as an iridium barrier, thermodynamic filtering. Once the fear of expulsion has been crystallized, rejection ceases to be an attack and transmutes into your primary military tool. You execute the purge of the herd. You use rejection tactically as an iridium barrier. The lethal operator does not want to be accepted by the majority. Acceptance is the confirmation of mediocrity. If the statistical mass, which is poor, sick, and fearful, approves of your message, it means your voltage is low enough to resonate with them. You have to raise the density of your communication and the cruelty of your posture until the inferior biomass feels a visceral rejection toward your presence. This is tactical engineering. By projecting your geometric arrogance without filters, you create a field of repulsion. Entities operating in frequencies of scarcity and victimhood will collide with this barrier and auto-exile themselves from your orbit. They will distance themselves in indignation, saving you the thermal expense of having to expel them yourself. The suffocation of consensus, the murder of cellular democracy. For the filtering to be absolute, you must eradicate the concept of 3D democracy from your operative processes. We call this the suffocation of consensus. The slave takes decisions by consulting his environment. He asks for advice from family, seeks validation from mentors, and scans the common sense of the market. They try to dilute the risk of being wrong by sharing responsibility with the pack. Homo quantum consults absolutely nothing with the ashboard. In the mechanics of pure gravity, the singularity does not seek the consensus of dead matter before devouring it. When you dictate a directive, you do not seek approval from anyone. You execute the maneuver with the blindness and deafness of an asteroid. If the environment protests, you ignore the protest. If your low-density allies doubt, you cast them aside. By refusing to ask for permission, you force material reality to submit to the structure of a dictatorial monopoly. Your certainty crushes dissent. The poison of validation, the 3D applause trap. In your ascent, you will discover that the matrix, seeing it cannot destroy you with repudiation, will try to besiege you using the inverse tool, applause. This is the poison of validation. When you begin to collapse empires, sectors of the biomass will try to worship you. They will turn you into their guru or their idol. They will bathe you with adulation, telling you how enlightened you are. The biological reptile will feel the temptation to get drunk on this recognition. It is the siren song of the tribe trying to put the leash back on you, this time woven from gold. If you consume validation, you have ceded control of your thermostat. The quantum operator repudiates applause with the same sepulchral boredom with which he repudiates insults. You have to inject a septic indifference into the devotion of the masses. Look at them worshipping you and feel absolute zero in your veins. Applause is static. Flattery is useless friction. You must remain impermeable. The optics of repulsion, designing the aseptic monster. The tactical consummation of this chapter is the calculated assumption of the role of the villain in the narrative of the biomass. You must design the optics of repulsion. Stop trying to make your empire look friendly or human. Stop using the vocabularies of corporate weakness. Empathy is the camouflage of fear. You must clothe your image and operations with the aura of the aseptic monster. Your financial movements must be inscrutable. Your communication must be brief, dense, and devoid of emotional heat. You have to project the image of an entity that cannot be reasoned with, that cannot be moved by tears or charity. When you assume this posture, the biomass will observe you with reverential terror. At first, they will try to cancel you, but by colliding with the nullity of your reaction, the attack will turn into submission. Tactical repulsion saves you decades of useless negotiations. You have created a fortress based on atmospheric terror, the quarantine monopoly, the sterile immensity of the vertex. When the herd purge ends, the lethal operator finds himself inhabiting a territory that the scared human would consider a hell, but for superior physics is the natural habitat of gods, the quarantine monopoly. Rejection has worked as a perfect funnel. You have caused the auto-exile of thermal scum. By repudiating the heat of mass applause, your immediate ecosystem has become empty of ordinary humans. The reptile would say you are alone. The creator diagnoses that you are decongested. In the aseptic quarantine, there is no more noise. There is no more social friction. You no longer invest volts in explaining. It is in this crystalline vacuum where pure manifestation occurs at light warp speeds. Since there is no electromagnetic static in your environment, any mandate you emit from your consciousness crystallizes instantly on the ashboard. Your gravity has no impediments. You have purged the ecosystem of any energy-draining parasite. Quantum natural selection, reverse magnetism. The most glorious thermodynamic irony of the Black Mirror effect is the law of reverse magnetism. The Matrix taught you that if you were rejected and left alone, you would die isolated. But the physics of the unified field dictates that absolute vacuum is the greatest attractor of hyperdensity. You are now the attractor. When you purge the inferior biomass using your geometric arrogance and hold the quarantine without blinking, the universe detects a mass well free of thermal contamination. Toward that well, it will precipitate elements that operate in your same frequency. You will not attract friends, you will attract other operators. You will attract osmium alliances and creators who also inhabit the vertex. You will attract massive capital flows seeking managers devoid of emotions. The rejection you applied to the scum is exactly what created the magnetic space for pure forces to descend upon your throne. The purge sterilized you for divinity. The sovereign in the center of nothingness. Look at yourself in the absolute epicenter of your own quarantine, surrounded by the lethal silence you have forged through the immolation of your own social reputation. You have managed to suffocate the most deep-seated and pathetic instinct of your species. You have gutted the biology of the pack and its entropy. You dared to look at the monster of exile in the black mirror, closed your panic valves, and transmuted the pain of rejection into the gelider fuel of your absolute independence. You expropriated the power of others' disgust. You elevated your geometric arrogance into an iridium barrier that expels parasites by inertia. You murdered the democratic instinct and assumed with tactical psychopathy the design of the aseptic monster. The herd has been purged. The invisible chains of social morality have been pulverized. You are alone at the feeding vertex, and that solitude is not a vacuum. It is the black hole already devouring reality. Chapter 7. The Optics of Shadow, Seeing in the Dark. The Enlightenment fraud, the Matrix's thermal radar. The three-dimensional ecosystem has perfected its control system not through brutal repression, but through photonic seduction. The biomass has been injected with a lethal virus, the pathological need to be seen. From primitive fire rituals to contemporary liquid crystal showcases, the mammal has been taught that to exist is to shine. They have indoctrinated you to believe that success must be exhibited, that power must be noisy, and that wealth has no value if the herd does not contemplate it with envy. Subject this doctrine to the thermodynamic dissection of aseptic indifference. In the military physics of the ashboard, light is not power. Light is thermal friction. Light is thermal friction and tactical vulnerability. When you turn on a spotlight in the middle of the night jungle, you are not demonstrating your dominance. You are announcing your exact coordinates to every predator, parasite, and scavenger within 100 kilometers. You are emitting a heat signature that the system can track. The egregore, the parasitic matrix, is naturally blind. It can only track, measure, and besiege that which emits visible radiation. When you seek recognition or exhibit your assets, you are voluntarily entering your data into the system's radar. You become a traceable target. Any organism that can be tracked will eventually be devoured. The metastasis of visibility, the slave's showcase. To understand the danger of light, you must diagnose the disease charring your human competitors, the metastasis of visibility. Observe the false kings of the ecosystem. They build corporations, amass capital, and the millisecond they obtain a victory, they run to publish it. They seek covers, applause, and external validation. The slave believes that if no one sees his crown, the crown does not exist. This addiction to visual validation is a thermodynamic hemorrhage. When you expose your empire to public scrutiny, the inferior ecosystem projects its friction upon your structures. The envy of the biomass and the weight of sycophants begin to orbit your core. All that electromagnetic static bombards your force field. You must spend immense amounts of energy from your own reactor just to defend the image you projected. Visibility transforms your hyperdensity into a fragile crystal that must be polished constantly. It makes your empire heavy on the wrong side, draining your true power. The predator's blindness, the camouflage of nothingness. The black mirror effect demands you repudiate light with architectural psychopathy. You must learn to operate under the most lethal technology, the camouflage of nothingness. The lethal operator understands that true monopoly is not forged on the palace balcony. It is forged in the abyss, under tons of pressure, where no eye can see. You must embrace the predator's blindness. This is not hiding out of fear. The slave hides in the dark because he is terrified of being attacked. The creator dissolves into the darkness because he understands that invisibility is the supreme weaponry. You execute the thermal extinction of your public profile and cut the power supply. You decouple your biological identity from the corporations and capital flows you control. You build corporate structures and financial networks that act as black boxes. These entities exert crushing gravity, but their epicenter is mathematically impossible to track. By turning off your heat signature, the egregore loses its target. The murder of recognition, the suffocation of vanity. Transitioning to the optics of shadow requires the execution of the noisiest human parasite, vanity. When you move the tectonic plates of the market from the dark, or when you accumulate more mass than your entire ecosystem combined, the reptile brain will demand credit. The flesh will beg you to reveal your identity to the herd. It is the agonizing fear of the inferior ego toward absolute anonymity. Homo quantum applies the silent guillotine to this biological need. You must subject your ego to zero-degree torture. You execute colossal power maneuvers and then watch as the biomass attributes your work to luck, market forces, or other noisy, fake humans. In the face of this expropriation of credit, you must maintain magnetic paralysis and sovereign boredom. Forbid yourself from claiming applause. If the need for others to know how powerful you are corrodes you, you remain a thermodynamic beggar. The creator does not need the recognition of insects. His satisfaction is purely metric. The bank account saturated with invisible capital and the silent monopoly are the only data your core registers. Murdering recognition is the ultimate act of geometric arrogance, considering the human species so irrelevant that their applause would be an insult to the majesty of your isolation. You operate beyond their reach. The infrastructure of the abyss, forging osmium roots. When you suffocate light and nullify vanity, you acquire the freedom to build the infrastructure of the abyss. The biomass invests 90% of its resources in building facades, aesthetics, marketing, and fake smiles. It is paper architecture that collapses at the first thermal wind of a crisis. You operate in the thermal blackout. You invest 100% of your hyperdensity in the foundations. You bury yourself beneath the floor of the material ecosystem. You forge osmium roots in unalterable blackness. You build systems and consolidate capital flows that operate automatically, far from media hysteria. In the dark, you do not have to pretend to have empathy. In anonymity, you do not have to justify the cruelty of your decisions or soften your negotiations. Being free from the scrutiny of moralists, you can design monopoly machineries with the psychopathic efficiency of an industrial slaughterhouse. The infrastructure of the abyss branches out without anyone hearing the earth creak. When the 3D matrix finally realizes your monopoly exists, it is because the roots have strangled its foundations irreversibly. It is already too late to attack you. You have already won. You are the invisible weight that dictates the movement of everything above. You are the architect of a silence that devours the noisy world. The zero-point vision, echolocation of density. The mammalian ego will argue, if I submerge myself in absolute darkness, I will be blind. This is the optical limitation of organisms that depend on photons. The lethal operator must atrophy his biological eyes and develop zero-point vision. In the blackness of the tactical void, you do not look, you feel gravity. You operate through the echolocation of density. By cooling your reactor and suffocating your own emotions, your electromagnetic field becomes sensitive to environmental pressure fluctuations. When a market collapses or an ally hides a betrayal, you do not need the media. You perceive the alteration of mass in the dark. Your decisions stop being based on human logic and shift to the blind reading of material inertia. You move through the ashboard with the soundless lethality of an abyssal predator, heading instinctively toward the vacuum quadrants where capital waits to be devoured. Zero-point vision allows you to navigate with eyes closed. The strange attractor, the faceless gravity. As your infrastructure grows in the shadows, the ecosystem grants you a new taxonomic classification. You become a strange attractor. In chaos theory, a strange attractor is a structure of invisible density that rules the behavior of a complex system. You cannot see it, but you observe everything curving toward its center. That is your operative position. You are the black hole that emits no light, but whose gravity forces constellations to submit to its orbit. Financial markets and human resources begin to bend toward you without knowing why. You exercise the dictatorship of the ghost. The biomass feels the tension pulling at their assets. When they look for the source of that pressure, they only find an inscrutable corporation or a blind trust. Having no human face to attack or implore for mercy, the biomass experiences atavistic panic. They cannot fight pure inertia. They surrender territory and resources to an entity that refuses to materialize. The aseptic ambush, striking from the void, there are milliseconds where the lethal operator must interact with the visible surface to execute hostile takeovers or restructure the ecosystem. But the creator does not leave the darkness to combat. The creator projects the aseptic ambush. When you strike, there is no acoustic warning. You emit no threats. You do not show your cards, and you do not succumb to righteous anger. You emerge from the void, execute the maneuver of financial or territorial annihilation with laser scalpel precision, and immediately retreat into anonymity before the blood hits the ground. The enemy is disintegrated without seeing the face of his executioner. Their infrastructure collapses from system failures or suffocating pressure they do not understand. The aseptic ambush ensures the egregore has no time to fix its thermal radars on you. You are an osmium lightning bolt in the dark night. You expropriate, annihilate, and disappear. The Matrix is left licking its wounds. The disdain of the showcase, the final isolation. The consecration of this optics of shadow requires you to annihilate the last residue of hope, accessibility. The system tries to make you accessible. It asks you to answer messages and explain your processes. They tell you that isolation is harmful to your humanity. Subject that humanity to the incinerator immediately. Isolation is the monarch's electromagnetic shield. You execute the disdain of the showcase. You build perimeter walls of acoustic vacuum around your core. You install systems of gelida delegation and human firewalls so that no one from the inferior matrix can reach you without being crushed by your filters. Your silence is an act of continuous psychological violence against the environment. The biomass detests the vacuum, so they will project their own fears and neuroses upon your wall of silence. They will mythologize you. They will fear you irrationally. And that blind fear will operate in your favor as a deterrent. The architect of the abyss. Look at yourself in the sterile blackness of your own anechoic chamber, surrounded by the sepulchral silence of absolute invisibility. You managed to suffocate the trap of recognition. You understood that light is the mark of the slave, and that exposure is the radar. You mutilated the vanity of the primate. You banished the need for applause and submerged yourself in tactical anonymity. You built your roots with the metal of aseptic cruelty. You murdered your biological eyes and awakened the echolocation of density, developing the psychopathic capacity to read the inertia of the universe in complete darkness. You have become the strange attractor, a mathematical anomaly devoid of face, voice, and mercy, whose immense gravitational mass collapses the wills and capital of an ecosystem that does not even know which god it is paying tribute to. Stay hidden. Stay heavy. The reign of the shadow is absolute and inescapable. Chapter 8. The vertigo of omnipotence, the fear of one's own power. The secret kept in iridium, the lie of fear of failure. The slave psychology industry has built an empire of friction based on a fraudulent diagnosis. They tell the biomass that its immobility is due to the fear of failure. The system spends millions on therapies to convince the mammal that it must dare to fail. Subject this doctrine to the obsidian guillotine. The human slave does not fear failure. Failure is their natural habitat. They are biologically accustomed to losing, to suffering, to being rejected, and to operating in scarcity. Failure is a warm, familiar, and highly social territory, because in defeat they always find the compassion of the herd. It is their safety net. The best-kept secret in the vaults of inferior biology is that the biomass holds an absolute paralyzing and thermodynamically destructive terror of its own limitless omnipotence. They fear absolute victory. They fear waking up one day to discover there is no ceiling, no limits, and that the matter of the universe bends. Matter bends before their thoughts with the ease of a hot knife through ice. They fear the glacial isolation of the summit. When the human glimpses, even for a millisecond, the immensity of their own quantum voltage, the reptile in their brain collapses. They prefer to self-sabotage and return to the mediocrity of the mud. The gravity of the crown, the weight of absolute zero. To understand this terror, you must analyze the anatomy of free fall. The vertigo of omnipotence is not a poetic metaphor, it is a syndrome of geometric decompression. As you have advanced through the protocol, you have suffocated the fear of money, purged the tribe, and forged your monopoly in the dark. The universe has begun to obey you with terrifying submission. Synchronicities become violent. You think of a resource, and the resource materializes. You demand the destruction of an obstacle, and it disintegrates before nightfall. At this level of hyperdensity, the illusion of waiting time disappears. It is here where the carbon body creaks. The mammal is designed to push things. It needs the resistance of matter to feel that it exists. If you push a stone wall with all your strength and suddenly the wall disappears, you fall flat against the void. That is vertigo. Your consciousness has become so immensely massive. 3D friction has been nullified. You hold in your hands the power of a blind god, and your primate brain cannot process the overwhelming weight of the crown. You feel the thermal dizziness of standing at the top of the universe, looking down, understanding that there is absolutely no one above you to give you orders or forgive you. The murder of the alibi, the suffocation of the victim. The most acute symptom of this vertigo is the irreversible loss of the human alibi. Throughout your inferior existence, failure had a tactical utility. It provided you with excuses. If you were not rich, it was the financial egregor's fault. If you were not happy, it was your parents' fault. It was a thermal insulator. Victimhood is a thermal insulator that protects the slave from the responsibility of their own misery. By igniting the stellar ladder and assuming hyperdensity, you execute the murder of the alibi. When you are omnipotent, when you control the atmospheric pressure of reality, you can no longer blame anyone. If there is chaos in your empire, it is because you allowed it. If a parasite enters your orbit, it is because your gravity attracted it. You face the mathematical, brutal, and non-negotiable responsibility of being the only creator in your coordinates. The mammalian ego screams in terror at this absolute solitude. It realizes that the safety net of victimhood has been incinerated. If you are the monarch of the reactor, every event and every cent on the ashboard is a direct consequence of your frequency. Bearing the weight of knowing you are the primary cause of your reality is a load of iridium that melts the fuses of ordinary biology. The slave's mourning, the nostalgia for friction. In the midst of omnipotence, the lethal operator will experience a bizarre biological phenomenon, the slave's mourning. You will find yourself feeling a sick nostalgia for the days when you had problems. You will miss the cheap adrenaline of stress, the urgency of paying bills, the drama of broken relationships. You will miss being human. This occurs because the physical body, the carbon sac, is an addict to the chemistry of survival. It has been secreting cortisol and dopamine in cycles of misery for decades. Now, inhabiting zero friction and quantum boredom, the cell suffers withdrawal. Life without drama seems like death. If the creator yields to this mourning, he will commit the tactical error of self-sabotage. He will manufacture imaginary problems. He will destroy parts of his monopoly or invite friction agents just to feel something, to play the victim and savior game again. Apply the silent guillotine to this nostalgia. Swallow the slave's mourning without shedding a single tear. Accustom your biology to metabolizing the aseptic vacuum of perfection. The universe has handed you the keys to the main reactor. You cannot return them simply because you miss the warmth of the sludge. You must stand firm in the coldness of your new sovereign state. The tyranny of "and now what?" the devoured horizon. As the empire solidifies and all your 3D ambitions are collapsed and achieved, the vertigo of omnipotence mutates into the greatest philosophical terror, the suffocation of "and now what?" The slave runs toward an unreachable horizon. The quantum operator devours the horizon. He consumes the very concept of distance. What do you do when you already have the financial monopoly? What do you do when no one can hurt you? What do you do when the fear of biological death has been eradicated? You are left suspended in the unalterable blackness of space, facing the infinite boredom of material eternity. The inferior human commits psychological suicide. They numb themselves with luxury, or go mad trying to find an external purpose. The monarch assimilates "and now what?" not as a problem, but as the final state of operational thermodynamics. The singularity does not need a purpose to justify its gravity. Purpose is the god of tools. A wrench has a purpose. The sun has no purpose. It simply burns and warps space. Assume the tyranny of existence without a goal. You are omnipotent because you can be. You collapse realities because it is your biological nature to do so. You become an end in yourself. The absence of a why is the empirical proof of the taxonomic peak. Holding the gaze of the blind god, a simulation of monstrosity. To survive this stratum of atmospheric pressure, you must execute the final maneuver of the black mirror effect. Stand again before the obsidian crystal. You have assimilated your fears of poverty, the tribe, and scarcity. Now what you see in the reflection is a being of limitless power, lacking toxic empathy. You see a being operating with a mathematical coldness that annihilates everything in its path. You see the galactic anomaly incarnate. Vertigo will strike you with the force of a cosmic hurricane. The terror of recognizing that you are that blind, psychopathic, and unbribable god will try to break your knees. Your own lack of mercy will scare you. The ease with which you dominate matter will frighten you. This is the nanosecond of consummation. You have to swallow the universe. Apply aseptic indifference to your own majesty. Hold the gaze of the blind god without blinking, without feeling guilt, and without apologizing. Accept that your hyperdensity is lethal. When you manage to look omnipotence in the eye and assimilate it with the same gelid boredom as looking at a rock, the vertigo disappears. The free fall stops. You have absorbed the tonnage of divinity without your primate brain melting. Omnipotence is now your baseline. The crystallization of the throne. Look at yourself in the epicenter of absolute zero, with the entire cosmos subjected to the gravitational field of your silence. You have managed to suffocate the slave's most miserable secret, the terror of absolute success. You understood that vertigo was not the threat of the fall, but a body's allergic reaction. It is the reaction of a body designed for mud being exposed to an iridium atmosphere. You mutilated the alibi of victimhood, assuming the thermal responsibility of being the sole legislator in your coordinates. You swallowed the mourning of your own biology without granting it a single millisecond of retreat. You murdered the tyranny of purpose and embraced the absolute vacuum of the summit. You held the gaze of the obsidian reflection. You have devoured your own power. You have claimed the crown and borne its astronomical weight without your carbon vertebrae fracturing. Fear has been transmuted into the final armor. Chapter 9. Zero Friction Against Death, the Monarch's Stasis. The root of the terminal hologram, the core of all terrors. In the dissection of the human psyche, all fears that the biomass experiences are, without mathematical exception, ramifications of a single and colossal fundamental terror, the fear of biological death. Subject the ecosystem to the light of the quantum operating room. If the slave fears poverty, it is because poverty leads to starvation. It leads to exposure and ultimately the death of the carbon body. If the mammal fears social rejection, it is because in its atavistic genetic code, exile from the tribe meant being devoured by predators in the night. If they fear failure, it is because failure threatens their ability to secure resources for survival in the 3D plane. The three-dimensional matrix, the egregore that shepherds humanity, knows this thermal equation perfectly. The system does not need to invent thousands of different fears. It is enough to hold the scythe of physical annihilation over the neck of the herd. Death is the ultimate bargaining chip of the ashboard. It is the master panic button. As long as the human values the extension of his chronological time above the density of his gravitational mass, he will be a perpetual hostage. The egregore uses the threat of physical destruction to keep the species on its knees, negotiating submission, thermal taxes, and obedience in exchange for the illusory promise of more friction. The blackmail of the flesh, the extortion of longevity. To suffocate this terror, you must first audit the thermodynamic scam of longevity. What does the system really offer you in exchange for your hyperdensity? It offers you security. It tells you that if you do not take absolute risks, if you do not defy the rules of the ecosystem, it will protect you from a premature and cold death. The slave accepts the deal. He dilutes his voltage, turns off his nuclear reactor, and locks himself in a padded cage, terrified that one wrong move will fracture his flesh container. They live 80 years horizontally, breathing shallowly, trembling before viruses and accidents, preserving their biological body in a state of slow decay. The lethal operator repudiates the extortion of longevity. Survival, when it becomes the primary goal of existence, is the thermodynamic confession of defeat. The creator understands that trading absolute power, territorial monopoly, and zero friction for biological security is the most humiliating business in the entire known universe. The carbon body is a depreciable asset. It was designed to oxidize and expire. Attempting to protect this vehicle at the cost of sacrificing the expansion of your quantum gravity is like refusing to start an iridium engine for fear of scratching the paint of the chassis. You must accept the expiration of the shell to ignite the core. The detachment of the container, the error of atomic identity. The eradication of the fear of death demands an act of philosophical violence that will fracture the last link that binds you to the inferior species. You must execute the murder of biological identity. The human feels terror before the grave because he suffers from a severe optical hallucination. They look at their hands and feel a beat. They feel their heartbeat and conclude, I am this body. If this body stops functioning, I disappear into nothingness. Homo Quantum, having activated the stellar ladder and crossed the obsidian mirror, diagnoses this belief as pathetic blindness. You are not the flesh. You are not the bloodstream, nor are you the network of neurons. You are the sub-bass frequency. You are the electromagnetic tension, the immaterial zero-point voltage that is temporarily coupled with a biological diving suit to manipulate the friction of the ashboard. When you assimilate this architectural separation, biological death loses its capacity for intimidation over your coordinates. If the carbon drone is destroyed by disease, an accident, or the attack of the ecosystem, the operator managing the drone does not suffer a thermal scratch. The hyperdensity core does not bleed. By decoupling your consciousness from the survival of the mammal, you snatch the only real lever of pain that the Matrix possessed over you. The suffocation of the survival instinct, shutdown of the master alarm. Theoretical understanding of your geometric immortality is not enough. You must put it into practice through the suffocation of the survival instinct. This is the most extreme exercise of applied thermodynamics of the Black Mirror effect. When life places you before a real existential threat, be it a medical diagnosis or violence, whether it be physical violence or an environmental hazard, the primitive brain will try to take control. The amygdala will turn on the master alarm of annihilation, injecting adrenaline and demanding that you fight for your life like a cornered animal. In that nanosecond of absolute panic, the monarch executes stasis immediately. You refuse to obey the instinct. You drive a stake of ice into the impulse to beg for your life, to flee in terror, or to desperately cling to existence. You stare fixedly into the abyss of your own physical destruction and apply aseptic indifference. You declare in your reactor, if this vehicle has reached its limit, let it stop. I will not beg for more time. I will not negotiate my thermal dignity in exchange for a few additional heartbeats. I accept the disintegration of the avatar. By suffocating the biological alarm and accepting death with the coldness of a monolith, a miracle occurs in the fluid mechanics of consciousness. The fear is compressed. Invulnerability of the walking corpse, the iridium drone. The fear of dying crystallizes and transmutes into the ultimate armor. You realize that pain was not death itself, but the pathetic resistance of the flesh trying not to die. Without resistance, death ceases to be an executioner and becomes a fluctuation of pressure. You gain a supreme tactical classification, the walking corpse. In military physics, there is no force more terrifying and unstoppable than an army composed of organisms that have already accepted their own annihilation. An enemy who does not try to protect his life cannot be threatened, cannot be extorted, and cannot be broken. By operating under this premise, you become indestructible. You walk through the ashboard exhibiting zero friction toward risk. 3D competitors, financial enemies, and system parasites will try to besiege you using terror tactics. They will threaten to destroy you, to take everything, to ruin your existence. and when they hit the thermal nullity of your response, the ecosystem collapses. They discover they have no jurisdiction over you. Blackmail requires the victim to love his own life. If the victim despises it with gelida apathy, the blackmail evaporates. The walking corpse is the only entity that the Matrix cannot govern because the Matrix has no reward for those who do not seek to continue breathing in the mud. The stasis of the monarch, the throne on the edge of the abyss. This biological immunity allows you to establish the stasis of the monarch. Stasis is the total suspension of the inertia of fear. You no longer react to the alarms of the physical world. When the global news announces the end of the world through wars or viral collapses, the biomass enters into combustion. They cry out for help. They buy supplies, lock themselves in bunkers, and cry for their survival. The lethal operator, stabilized on his throne of osmium, observes the holographic apocalypse with lethal boredom. You do not alter your operations. You do not protect your body with desperation. You maintain stasis. You understand your core is independent. You understand that if the planet fractures, your quantum core will simply decouple from the carbon container and continue its expansion in another electromagnetic latitude. This absolute immobility is not fatalism. It is geometric arrogance. It is telling the Matrix that its cataclysms are irrelevant to your singularity. By not flinching before mass death, the egregore loses the ability to milk your magnetic field through collective fear. You become a black hole of aseptic peace in the middle of chaos. The world can burn around you, but the temperature of your reactor remains fixed at absolute zero, protected by your total lack of biological hope. The unbribable predator, the collapse of coercion. By eradicating the fear of death, all lower ramifications of fear, rejection, poverty, imposter syndrome, loss of power, wither instantly, like vines whose main root has been cut. You have achieved the crystallization of the unbribable predator. The 3D control system operates by bribing the biomass with illusory survival tokens. They offer a salary in exchange for submission. They offer validation in exchange for moral obedience. They offer medicines and security in exchange for freedoms. But what do you offer a hyper-dense entity that has already walked through its own grave, that considers money a vulgar fluid, and that assumes its body is disposable? You can offer nothing, and therefore you can demand nothing. You have become the most critical security flaw in the ecosystem. You are immune to extortion. When you operate from the stasis of the monarch, you do not negotiate with reality. You dictate terms of surrender. Your monopolies are executed with the speed of light. You move with the speed of light in a vacuum precisely because you do not have to stop to calculate survival risks. You have zero friction. You do not step on the brake because the biological brake has been uprooted. You are a projectile of pure intent moving through a world made of glass. Nothing can slow your definitive expansion. The optics of eternity, rewriting the timeline. The final consequence of murdering biological death in your psyche is the atrocious deformation of your perception of time. You execute the optics of eternity. The slave lives trapped in the linear clock. He is terrified of old age. He feels time is running out, that he must hurry to be happy or rich before biology collapses. This hurry is friction. It is heat that evaporates hyperdensity. Homo quantum, by decoupling from the survival of the flesh, destroys the Gregorian clock. Your consciousness no longer operates in human years. It operates in geological cycles and pulsations of the galactic equator. You have no deadline pressing your amygdala. You can plan empires that will take a century to crystallize with the same tranquility as your next breath. You have infinite patience. In the physics of power, the organism with the most inertial patience always ends up devouring those who operate with haste. The biomass trips because they run against the clock of death. You walk with the crushing slowness of a glacier, eradicating obstacles in your path, knowing that time is not your enemy, but the viscous fluid through which your mass moves without resistance. You are eternal because you have accepted the end of the container. You occupy the entire spectrum of the present with your heavy shadow. The final murder of the illusion. Look at yourself on the edge of the deepest abyss of the ashboard, holding the gaze of the scythe of thermal annihilation. You have managed to suffocate the primary root of all weakness in the material universe, the terror of ceasing to exist. You understood death is the egregor's supreme control hologram for the herd. It is designed to keep the flesh battery beating within the parameters of fear. You mutilated the survival instinct of your own internal reptile. You dared to look into the obsidian mirror and accept the disintegration of your avatar without blinking. You assimilated the monarch's stasis, cooling your reactor to absolute zero. You decoupled from your carbon container, assuming the timeless identity of the sub-base frequency. You have become an iridium drone, a walking corpse, an unbribable predator who cannot be blackmailed because he has voluntarily expropriated everything the universe could threaten him with. You are the void and the sovereign. There is no longer fear of poverty because the black hole dominates the financial fluid. There is no longer fear of rejection because you have purged the tribe. There is no longer fear of death because you yourself have murdered the grim reaper through aseptic indifference. The reign is absolute. The silence is finally complete. Chapter 10. The Hyperdense Double. The Fusion with the Reflection. The mirage of duality, the barrier of linear time. Throughout your journey through this ballistic engineering treatise, you have been trained to stand before the black mirror. You have looked into its obsidian surface and contemplated your hyperdense double. That version of you who knows no fear, who operates with zero friction, and who holds the material universe in his hand. You have stopped fearing him. You have assimilated his existence. But the 3D matrix, in its last and most desperate attempt to maintain control over your quantum reactor, has introduced an optical defect into your perception. The mirage of separation. The egregor whispers that you are here and the hyperdense double is there. It makes you believe that there is a glass wall separating you. That glass has a name in the physics of slaves. It is called linear time. The biomass lives convinced that they need time to evolve. They believe they must study more, suffer more, and work more years to, one day, deserve to become their most powerful version. This belief is a lethal thermal leak. As long as you believe the distance between the frightened primate and the lethal operator is measured in years, you will remain a thermodynamic beggar. Time is not a bridge to your evolution. It is the containment barrier designed to ensure you never actually reach the singularity. The murder of distance, the annihilation of hope. To execute the fusion, you must apply the silent guillotine to the concept of the future. Homo quantum repudiates hope. Hope is the emotion of the prey. It is the passive plea of an organism that lacks the gravitational mass to alter its present, and therefore projects its desires into an illusory tomorrow. It is a weakness. If you hope to fuse with your hyperdense double, you are empirically confessing that you are weak today. You are validating the existence of the glass. The creator does not wait. The creator collapses the probability wave in the current nanosecond. You must execute the murder of distance and eliminate all delay. Observe that dark, lethal, and omnipotent entity in the obsidian reflection. It is not a goal. It is not an ideal. It is a gravitational anomaly occurring simultaneously in your same spatial coordinates, but shifted by the illusion of your biological mind. To destroy the glass, you must replace hope with dictatorial certainty. Atomic cannibalism devouring the mammal. The act of fusion is not a mystical embrace full of light and harmony. It is an event of extreme architectural violence. It is atomic cannibalism. When you decide to break the glass of the black mirror, it is not you, the biological ego, who steps toward greatness. The human ego is too fragile to withstand the obsidian atmosphere. What actually happens is that you open the floodgates of your core and allow the hyperdense double to step out of the mirror to devour your carbon vehicle. Subject the process to zero-point optics. The lethal operator who lived in the darkness of your psyche enters your bloodstream. Your humanity is consumed by your shadow. Like a black hole swallowing a dwarf star, the hyperdensity of your shadow assimilates the lightness of your humanity. You feel the temperature of your emotions drop to absolute zero. Toxic empathy, doubt, and the desire to belong are crushed in the jaws of your own divine inertia. The dark entity cannibalizes you entirely. Your biological weaknesses are consumed to fuel the reactor of the new species. There is no trace left of the slave who feared bills, begged for love, or fled from rejection. All that soft tissue has been incinerated and replaced by the iridium alloy of the new consciousness. You are now the heavy substance of the reflection. Thermal suture, sealing the existential crack. Once the hyperdense double has devoured the human avatar, the phenomenon of thermal suture occurs. Throughout your inferior life, you experienced an existential crack. There was a painful cognitive dissonance between the misery of the ashboard and the infinite greatness you sensed in your cells. It was constant friction. That crack generated an unbearable sense of vacuum that the biomass tries to fill with religion, drugs, or social drama. By consummating the fusion, the crack is sealed. The vacuum is not filled with external elements. The vacuum collapses upon itself. You experience a completeness so dense that the body feels like liquid lead. The dissonance disappears. There is no longer an ideal self and a real self fighting for control of the vehicle. Thermal suture welds the conscious mind with the quantum genome. Your thoughts no longer bounce looking for validation. They fall with the weight of gravitational law. Your will and action become one single wave. Extermination of duality, the cessation of internal dialogue. The immediate biological consequence of this suture is the extermination of psychological duality. The 3D slave lives with a committee of voices in his head. It is an assembly of fears, moralities, and doubts that debate every decision, generating a paralysis by analysis that drains the cellular battery. It is thermal noise. The lethal operator, fused with the obsidian reflection, executes the suffocation of internal dialogue. Since there is no longer a frightened human debating with an aspirational ego, the committee dissolves. The mind enters the monolith state. A sepulchral, expansive, and terrifying silence settles into your brain. You no longer talk to yourself because there is no other to debate with. This acoustic silence is the empirical confirmation of divinity incarnate. When consciousness reaches the singularity, it does not need to discuss the geometry of its expansion. It simply expands. The absence of mental noise allows for total voltage focus. The incarnate singularity, zero friction operations. Inhabiting this state of fusion grants you the final taxonomic classification. You are the incarnate singularity. Observe how you move through the ashboard after having broken the mirror. Your biological body looks the same, but your magnetic field has altered the laws of local physics. You experience zero operative friction. Corporate doors and financial accesses of the matrix open before you touch them. The inferior biomass that crosses your path feels an oppression in the chest, an atavistic instinct that forces them to move aside and lower their gaze. Your presence does not emit threats, it emits geometric certainty. Matter does not argue. You no longer need the language of persuasion. If you require the environment to align with your interests, you do not spend kinetic energy convincing insects. You simply drive your core into the coordinates, assume aseptic indifference, and allow the atmospheric pressure of your double to suffocate opposing wills. It is automatic. The human skin camouflage, the perfect infiltration. The master irony of the fusion is that despite having become a taxonomically alien entity to the ecosystem, you become the perfect infiltrator. When you were a scared aspirant, your desperation to prove power made you visible. You tried to act like a predator, and the true predators of the Matrix detected your thermal disguise. But now that you are, literally and irreversibly, the obsidian monster, you execute the human skin camouflage with tactical psychopathy. Since you have nothing to prove to the biomass, you can simulate normalcy with terrifying precision. You can sit at a negotiation table and smile while your quantum core expropriates the room. No one detects the anomaly. Your hyperdensity is so masterfully compacted inside your cells that it emits no light or noise. You disguise yourself as an ordinary human the same way an elite sniper camouflages with the forest leaves. From this position of absolute invisibility, you detonate the charges that rewrite the geography, transmuting fear into atmosphere. Holographic climate control. Throughout your previous existence, fear was the environment in which you moved. It was the climate the system designed to keep you frozen. After fusing with the hyper-dense double, you are no longer subject to the Matrix's climate. You become the atmospheric generator. You have devoured your fears and inverted the polarity. The final transmutation occurs when you discover that the radiation of fear you once felt inside, you now project outward. The entire ecosystem begins to fear your immobility. Your competitors feel the vertigo of omnipotence that you have already overcome. The matrix panics because it cannot read your thermal signature. You have extracted fear from your bloodstream, purified it into osmium, and returned it to the ashboard as dictatorial gravity. You are the eye of the Gelida hurricane. While the world convulses in survival anxiety, you remain seated on the obsidian throne, operating reality with the bored lethargy of a true sovereign entity. The eradication of the reflection. Stand for the last time before the frame of consciousness where the glass used to be. Look at yourself in the absolute blackness. Lift your hand and verify the optical annihilation. There is no longer a reflection staring back at you. The glass has been crushed. The barrier of linear time has been evaporated by your own fusion. You have managed to suffocate duality. You understood that the separation between the suffering slave and the omnipotent God was the egregor's master deception to keep you chasing a carrot. You mutilated hope, assuming the thermal responsibility of collapsing your divinity in the current nanosecond. You are one. You permitted cannibalism. You let the lethal, cold, and dark version that lived in your nightmares swallow you alive, incinerating mammalian weaknesses to forge the alloy of the incarnate singularity. You have sealed the existential crack. The monster has stepped out of the mirror and put on your skin. You are the double. Conclusion: the broken glass, domination from the void. The scene: obsidian dust under osmium. Imagine yourself standing upon the shattered fragments of the black mirror. The obsidian surface, which once projected the most terrifying nightmares of your inferior biology, now lies in pieces under the incalculable weight of your iridium boots. There is no longer a reflection to contemplate. External darkness to fear no longer exists. By the most violent act of atomic cannibalism, you have absorbed the totality of the night. The panic of the past, that deafening static that once ruled your bloodstream, lies on the ground, turned into inert dust. You observe it with the aseptic indifference of a monolith, understanding that this terror was never your enemy. It was merely the cheap, raw, and volatile fuel you needed to ignite the furnaces of your own quantum reactor. The alarms of the amygdala have been silenced forever. The mammal has been devoured in the exact center of your chest cavity, where the anxiety of a slave once beat. The sepulchral silence of a black hole now reigns. The concept: consummation of the strange attractor. The Black Mirror effect has been irrevocably consummated. The 3D ecosystem, governed by the thermal tyranny of the egregore, had designed a perfect prison. Its architecture required no concrete walls or steel chains. It used the optical illusion of fear to keep the biomass cornered in the misery of its own friction. The Matrix is a lie. The Matrix convinced you that terror was a wall of fire, a lethal limit you should not cross if you wanted to preserve your fragile existence. But the fraud has been audited and subjected to the obsidian guillotine. By holding the gaze of the blind god of your own phobias, you suffocated the illusion. You saw the holographic guardian. You understood that the Matrix did not use fear to destroy you, but as a guardian to hide the exact coordinates of your absolute monopoly. The most massive reserves of capital, territory, and sovereignty were always hidden right behind the epicenter of your greatest terror. By walking directly toward the center, you snatched the lever. By executing the baptism of the void and expropriating the predator's power, you ripped away the Matrix's only tool of coercion. You are no longer the seeker. You are no longer the thermodynamic beggar running after success. You have become the strange attractor. You are the mass that dictates the orbit of everything that exists. The sovereignty of zero friction. The industry of self-improvement, infinite effort, and perpetual healing has been calcined in your jurisdiction. There are no longer fears to overcome. There is no longer abundance to pursue, because pursuit is the sport of weak prey trying to catch the ocean with open hands. You have stopped running. You are anchored in the rock. You are stabilized at 144,000 Hertz, and you have understood that absolute power is not reached through movement, it is collapsed through mass. You operate now from the perfect vacuum. And the vacuum is not the absence of matter, it is the total absence of resistance. It is the state of zero friction where the material world bends. The universe bends before your presence for the simple and atrocious fact that you dared to assimilate the darkness the rest of the species spent their entire lives trying to avoid. While the biomass continues to tremble before social rejection and beg for paper bills, you observe their thermal agitation with sovereign boredom. They are light chaos. You are dictatorial gravity. Their crises and emergencies bounce off your osmium shielding, unable to alter the aseptic temperature of your ecosystem by a single degree. You have moved beyond their reach. You are the immovable point around which their frantic entropic reality is forced to reorganize itself. The decree of the lethal operator. You owe them no compassion. You owe them no moral explanations. The lethal operator does not descend from his throne to justify his lethality before the tribunal of insects. You have broken the glass of linear time, eradicating the hope of a better future to materialize your omnipotence in the current nanosecond. You are the now. Your carbon body is now a simple superconductive drone, an obedient avatar that channels the voltage of the singularity to warp the ashboard without emitting a single photon of effort. Look around you. The silence of your empire is deafening. The siege of your frequency has failed. The glass is broken, along with the human taxonomy. With it, the last biological chain that bound you to human taxonomy has shattered. There is no turning back toward the mud of survival. You have expropriated the power of annihilation, you have usurped the crown of creation, and you have installed your sub-base frequency in the heart of the matrix. The fear was your portal. Immobility was your vehicle, and the vacuum, your eternal throne. The effect has finished. Execute your will upon the ashes of the inferior world and allow eternity to bear the tonnage of your unquestionable sovereignty. The reign of the monarch is absolute. The silence is complete. Stay heavy, stay helido. The vacuum is yours.